Every workplace has them. The colleague who gets handed the high-stakes assignment when everything is on the line. The one the manager trusts to host the surprise visit, untangle the impossible project, or steady the team when the ground is shifting. Their managers can rarely explain what sets them apart, only that they want more of them. In Impact Players, leadership researcher Liz Wiseman sets out to name the thing that has always felt unnameable, the precise difference between the people who make an outsized impact at work and their equally talented peers who somehow don't. What follows is a summary of her book and the framework at its heart. Wiseman is no stranger to this terrain. A former executive at Oracle, where she ran the corporate university and led talent development, she went on to found the Wiseman Group and to write the bestseller Multipliers. For Impact Players, she and her team studied 170 managers across 9 companies, among them Google, NASA, Adobe, Salesforce, and SAP, asking each to describe their most valuable contributors alongside their merely typical ones. Out of that comparison came a clear and teachable pattern. 5 practices, each flowing from a single underlying outlook that together form what she calls the impact player mindset. The argument that follows is not about working harder, being smarter, or possessing some rare gift. It is about how a person sees the ordinary frustrations of work, the messy problems, the unclear roles, the moving targets, the relentless demands, and what they choose to do in response. That, Wiseman contends, is a mindset available to anyone willing to adopt it. Here is how she builds the case, chapter by chapter. Chapter 1. The Impact Players. Wiseman opens with a scene anyone who has watched sports will recognize. It is the decisive moment of a big game, and the coach must choose who goes in. There are several strong, capable athletes on the bench, but the coach taps one, not necessarily the fastest or the strongest, but the one who understands the gravity of the moment and can be counted on to deliver. That same scene, she shows, plays out daily in offices everywhere. A district manager named Jamal learns the CEO is coming for a surprise store visit while the store manager is away. He needs someone who can showcase the store honestly, handle its problems with candor, and represent the whole team without grandstanding. He taps Joya, who performs brilliantly. For Joya, it was never about self-promotion. It was about representing her community to the best of her ability. These are the people Wiseman calls impact players, and her central claim is that what makes them valuable is not a hidden talent, but a way of seeing. Drawing on her study of 170 managers, she identifies a small set of recurring situations that define the modern workplace. Problems no one owns, meetings with no clear leader, unfamiliar terrain with new obstacles, goals that shift as you approach them, and demands that grow faster than your capacity. These were once considered extraordinary. Now they are the everyday weather of work. And the dividing line between ordinary and extraordinary contribution, she argues, is how a person reads these situations. Where typical contributors see a threat, a nuisance that lowers their productivity, or even a personal danger to their standing, impact players see an opportunity to add value. Wiseman tells of Jethro Jones, who took the principal's job at a struggling middle school in Fairbanks, Alaska, that was slated for closure. Rather than managing decline, he told his demoralized staff they had nothing to lose, and therefore a rare freedom to take risks. The school reinvented itself around personalized learning, became a district model, and is thriving today. The threat had become an opening. This is what Wiseman calls the difference between the threat lens and the opportunity lens, and she likens it to a continental divide. On one side, behavior flows toward ordinary contribution, on the other, toward high impact. From this single outlook flow the 5 practices that organize the rest of the book. When facing messy problems, impact players do the job that's needed rather than narrowly playing their assigned position. When it's unclear who is in charge, they step up and lead, and step back when their stewardship is done. When the work gets hard, they finish stronger instead of escalating or stalling. When conditions change, they ask and adjust rather than clinging to what they know. And when the team is under pressure, they make work light, lowering the drama and friction rather than adding to it. Each practice, Wiseman stresses, is a set of behaviors anyone can learn, not a personality trait reserved for a lucky few. What lingers from this opening is how much of a person's contribution turns out to be a matter of orientation, of what one chooses to attend to and how one chooses to respond. The impact player is not the person with the most raw ability, but the person whose attention is aimed outward, toward what is genuinely needed, and who carries an inner conviction that the situation can be made better. There is something quietly dignifying in that picture of work. It locates value not in credentials or status, but in a posture of service and agency that is open to everyone. Chapter 2. Make yourself useful. Building on that foundation, Wiseman turns to the first practice in depth, doing the job that's actually needed rather than the job you were assigned. The distinction sounds simple but cuts deep. Typical contributors operate with what she calls a duty-oriented mindset. They know their role, they play their position, and they wait for problems to be formally handed to them. Impact players, by contrast, work in the interstitial space where the big, messy problems live, the ones that fall between job descriptions and that no one quite owns. They treat those problems not as someone else's responsibility, but as the real work to be done. Wiseman illustrates this with Ben Putterman, a training director on her own team at Oracle. The company was rolling out a new product, and Ben's group was preparing the usual reports on how much training they had delivered, reports the executives routinely ignored. Instead of producing another of them, Ben stepped back and asked what the executives actually cared about. The answer was not training hours, but readiness. Who knew their material and was prepared to sell and support the new products? He reoriented everything around certification and readiness, even encouraging people to test out of training if they could get up to speed faster. Suddenly, the executives were engaged, correcting the data and working alongside his team, because he had made it easier for them to do their own jobs. While others stayed busy, Ben made an impact. The mechanism underneath this practice, Wiseman argues, is empathy directed at one's stakeholders. Impact players figure out what the people they serve genuinely value, what she frames as finding the win that works for everyone, and then make that their own priority. They are not servile, they are strategic about usefulness. And because they consistently deliver what matters most to the organization, they build credibility, which in turn earns them the latitude to take on still higher value work. The credibility compounds. Doing a little extra, getting to the point, anticipating what is needed, these are the behaviors managers report valuing most. There is a trap here that Wiseman names honestly, the difference between being useful and being merely busy, or between serving real needs and simply pleasing whoever is loudest. The practice she describes is not about saying yes to everything, but about discerning where one's capability does the most good and directing it there. Done well, making yourself useful is not self-effacement at all. It is the recognition that work is fundamentally an act of service to others, and that the person who understands this most clearly ends up the most valued, precisely because value was never the thing they were chasing. Chapter 3. Step Up, Step Back. The next question Wiseman turns to is what happens when something clearly needs doing, but it is unclear who is in charge. Most people, she finds, become bystanders. They assume someone else is responsible and will tell them when and what to do. Impact players do the opposite. They step up and lead without waiting to be appointed. Her survey data are striking. 96% of high-impact contributors take charge without being directed, against just 20% of typical contributors, and 91% are seen as good leaders, against 14% of their peers. The belief underwriting this, Wiseman explains, is that you do not need formal authority to take charge. She contrasts two models of leadership. By-command leaders wait to be appointed from above and then struggle to let go of control. On-demand leaders rise up when the situation calls for it, take ownership like temporary caretakers rather than permanent owners, and relinquish the reins once the job is done. She draws an analogy to playmakers in soccer, figures like Marta or David Beckham, who can lead from any position on the field, orchestrate the play, and make their teammates better, leading in bursts rather than clinging to a title. What distinguishes this practice from mere ambition is the second half of its name: stepping back. Impact players lead when needed and then follow others with equal ease, sharing authority and crediting the people they brought along. Wiseman lays out a recognizable pattern. They step up to fill the vacuum, they enroll others in the effort, and at the right moment they hand off the baton and let someone else carry it forward. This fluidity is what builds a culture of initiative and courage around them, and it is also what reassures leaders that giving them room will not produce a power grab. There is real wisdom in this rhythm of stepping up and stepping back, and it stands against two familiar failures. One is passivity, the waiting, the deference, the assumption that leadership is someone else's prerogative. The other is the will to power that takes initiative as a pretext to accumulate control. The impact player threads between them by treating leadership as stewardship, authority taken up for the sake of the task and the team, held lightly, and laid down when its purpose is served. That posture, leading by serving rather than by dominating, is older than any management theory, and it remains the most trustworthy form of authority there is. Chapter 4. Finish stronger. What follows from leading well is the discipline of seeing things through. Wiseman describes impact players as completion freaks, people who get the entire job done even when it turns hard and fills up with unforeseen obstacles. The contrast is with what she calls an avoidance mindset. Typical contributors take responsible action, but when the work gets difficult, they escalate it up the chain, hand it back to the manager, or quietly stall out. She captures the manager's frustration with a vivid image: the employee who, instead of attempting a solution, drops a dead rat on your doorstep like a cat. A problem delivered with no plan attached. The driver of this practice, she argues, is a heightened sense of personal agency, what psychologists call an internal locus of control and a proactive personality. Impact players operate from the guiding belief that they can improve the situation. They take ownership without needing constant supervision, anticipate problems before they erupt, and, crucially, they do not simply bulldoze through roadblocks. They give themselves permission to improvise, to do things differently, to find a better way when the original path is blocked. Finishing stronger is not stubbornness, it is resourceful persistence. Wiseman ties this directly to credibility with leaders. The behaviors that build trust most reliably, her data show, are anticipating problems and arriving with a plan, doing a little extra, figuring things out yourself, finishing without being reminded, and telling it straight. The credibility killers are the mirror image, escalating problems without offering solutions, making your manager chase you, and springing bad news surprises at the last minute. The impact player offers a low-maintenance, high-accountability proposition: hand them something and it comes back finished, with the rough edges already wrestled down. Beneath the practical advice lies a quietly demanding ethic. To finish stronger is to refuse the modern temptation to treat every obstacle as a reason to offload responsibility, and instead to accept that the difficulty is part of the work, and that one's commitments mean something. There is a kind of integrity in completion, in being the sort of person whose word, once given to a task, can be relied upon to the end. The reputation that follows of being a clutch player who can come from behind is simply the visible residue of a deeper habit, taking responsibility seriously rather than passing it along. Chapter 5. Ask and adjust. From persistence, Wiseman moves to adaptability and to one of the more counterintuitive findings in her study. When the rules change and the targets move, most professionals experience it as annoying, unfair, or threatening to the stability of their work. They dig in, sticking to what they know best, and playing by the rules that validate their existing expertise. Impact players read change differently, as an occasion for learning and growth, and so they adapt faster than their peers. They treat new conditions not as an assault on their competence, but as an invitation to extend it. What sets them apart most concretely is their relationship to feedback. They do not merely tolerate correction, they actively seek it out, asking for guidance before their managers think to offer it. Wiseman explains why this is so disarming. Most people find feedback threatening to receive and uncomfortable to give, so it tends to arrive late, if at all. By soliciting it early, asking what one change would most improve the work or what was missed, impact players get ahead of the cycle, preempting frustration and course-correcting before they drift too far. She compares it to a musician continually tuning their instrument. The people relying on your work never have to tell you that you are out of tune because you are always listening for it. This proactive asking, her data reveal, is the single most powerful credibility builder of all. It ranks first, just as offering to act before the boss asks ranks highest among the behaviors managers appreciate. The key is timing and intent. Constant needy requests for reassurance wear managers down. Asking at the right moments after trying a new approach or sensing a miss has the opposite effect. Feedback stops being punitive and becomes vital intelligence. The impact player turns the act of being corrected into a tool for staying relevant and raising their game. There is genuine humility in this practice, and it is worth pausing on. To ask for correction is to admit, as a settled disposition rather than a grudging exception, that one does not yet see the whole picture and that other people hold pieces of the truth about one's own work. That willingness to be corrected is not weakness but a precondition for growth. The person who cannot bear to be wrong cannot get better. Wiseman's coachable player, forever tuning the instrument, embodies a truth that reaches well beyond the office. We become more, not less ourselves, when we let reality and other people revise us. Chapter 6. Make Work Light. The fifth practice completes the set and concerns what happens when a team is weighed down by relentless pressure. Under load, Wiseman observes, typical contributors default to seeking help rather than offering it, and as that becomes their reflex, they add to the burden of an already overtaxed team. Some go further into what she calls anti-value. She describes Isle, an officer who stays late and fixes everyone else's work, telling her boss the quality was so bad she had to redo it. And in the process annoys 5 colleagues, who then undo her corrections while the manager is dragged in to arbitrate. As her boss put it, she may get the job done, but she creates more noise than value. Impact players do the reverse. They make hard work easier, not by taking on other people's tasks, but by being genuinely easy to work with. Wiseman frames it as the difference between levying a tax and offering a rebate. They reduce what she calls the phantom workload, the drama, politics, and friction that consume energy without producing anything. They bring a buoyancy and equanimity that lowers stress and, notably, reduces burnout for everyone around them. She offers Carl Dews, a business manager at SAP who took on a critical role at just 23, as a portrait of the high-performing, low-maintenance, no-nonsense colleague everyone wants on their team. The work itself does not get lighter, the experience of doing it does. Wiseman is careful to distinguish this from being a pushover or a people-pleaser. Making work light is not about lowering standards or absorbing everyone's problems. It is about contributing without creating drama, delivering without high maintenance, and bringing a steadiness that lets a team function under strain. The reputation that results, high-performing and low maintenance at once, is rare precisely because most people manage only one of those two things, and the strain of hard times tends to surface the difference. What gives this practice its quiet weight is that it treats work as something shared rather than merely individual. The person who lightens the load understands that a team is a body of people whose burdens are real, and that one can serve others not only through output, but through the spirit one brings into a room. To reduce another's stress, to make a hard season more bearable by one's mere presence and temperament, this is a form of generosity that rarely appears on a performance review, yet shapes whether work is a place of flourishing or of grinding depletion. There is something almost pastoral in it, the recognition that how we are with one another is itself a contribution. Chapter 7. Increase your impact. Having laid out the 5 practices, Wiseman turns from describing the mindset to cultivating it, first in oneself. Her encouraging claim is that none of this requires special talent. The practices are learnable, and small, seemingly insignificant shifts in how we think and act can compound into an enormous difference in impact. She offers a path of deliberate change, starting with one practice, building new habits through repetition, and using the everyday challenges of work as the very training ground on which the mindset is developed. The messy problems are not obstacles to growth, they are the curriculum. A central theme of this chapter is the role of belief in shaping behavior. Because the 5 practices each flow from an underlying outlook, the conviction that ambiguity is opportunity, that one can improve the situation, that feedback is a gift. Lasting change has to reach the level of assumptions, not just techniques. Wiseman encourages readers to examine the stories they tell themselves about difficulty and authority and change, because those quiet inner narratives are what generate the visible patterns of contribution. Shift the belief, and the behavior follows. Merely mimic the behavior without the belief, and it tends not to hold. She also addresses the harder cases honestly. What if the impact player mindset is not valued in your organization or by your manager? Her counsel is pragmatic. Discover what is valued, work on that agenda in the way that creates the most value for the people you serve, and thereby earn the respect and influence that gives you latitude to bring your own values into the equation. And if the environment is genuinely hostile to good contribution, or the leadership's values are questionable, she does not pretend otherwise. Her advice is to stay and help shape a better environment if you can, and if you cannot, to leave. Impact, in other words, is not infinitely portable. It depends partly on finding the right field on which to play. What stands out in this turn towards self-development is its insistence that growth is a matter of agency exercised over time. We are not, on this account, fixed quantities, sorted once and for all into the impactful and the ordinary. We are works in progress, capable of becoming more through deliberate practice and honest self-examination. That is a fundamentally hopeful anthropology, the human person as someone always still in the making, summoned to develop what has been given rather than to accept a static estimate of their worth. Chapter 8. Build a high-impact team. Wiseman then widens the lens from the individual to the leader, asking how managers can multiply this kind of contribution across a whole team. The answer begins with the conditions leaders create. She describes Dr. Kelly, an emergency physician who treated everyone caring for a patient, attending physician, house staff, nurses, even the patients themselves, as an essential part of the team, any one of whom might have the idea that saves a life. Under that kind of leadership, people come forward with ideas because it is clear their contribution is wanted. When people feel respected and valued, Wiseman notes, they experience belonging, connect more deeply, and contribute more. Much of the chapter is given over to the leader's role in setting the rules of the game explicitly. Every organization has an unwritten rule book, the subtle do's and don'ts of how things really get done and what actually builds credibility. Impact players tend to decode this on their own, but many capable people never do, and they fall behind not for lack of ability, but for lack of access. By making the implicit explicit, sharing the practices, naming what builds credibility, opening up networks and high-profile assignments, leaders can widen the pathway to impact so that more people can walk it. Wiseman gives particular attention to what she calls the missing impact players, the potential superstars within groups that have historically worked at a disadvantage. She cites research on how the glamorous, visible work and the unglamorous office housework get distributed unevenly, with women and people of color more often carrying the back-office load and less often getting the assignments that build reputations. Her point is managerial and practical. Leaders can use the impact player framework to surface overlooked contribution and to distribute opportunity more deliberately, rather than defaulting to the people who most resemble themselves. A team that harnesses its full range of talent simply has more to draw on. Underneath the management technique is a vision of the team as something more than a collection of interchangeable units. It is a community of distinct persons, each bringing particular gifts, whose contributions are coordinated rather than homogenized. The leader's task, on this view, is less to extract output than to create an order in which each person can offer what is genuinely theirs to give and be seen for it. That is a high calling for a manager, closer to cultivation than to control, and it rests on the conviction that every member of the team has real worth that good leadership exists to draw out. Chapter 9. Play all in. Wiseman closes by gathering the threads into a final exhortation. The most influential players, she reminds us, are not random in how they work. They find out what is important to those they serve and make it important to themselves. They take the lead and finish the job. They stay light on their feet and make work lighter for others. The pattern is consistent and, by now, familiar. But the closing chapter is less about analysis than about invitation. Having shown that the mindset is learnable, she asks the reader a direct question. How big do you plan to play? She frames the choice in terms of value and purpose, quoting Marianne Williamson. That playing small does not serve the world, she presses the reader to look around, notice what needs attention, and find a way to contribute. The summons is to step off the sidelines, to tap into one's passion and purpose, and to begin making an impact now rather than waiting for permission or for conditions to be perfect. Playing all in means bringing one's full capability to bear on the needs that are genuinely there in the situation one is actually in. There is something bracing in ending a research-driven book on a note of vocation. Beneath all the data and frameworks, Wiseman's final word is that work can be a place of meaning. That to make oneself useful, to lead and serve, to finish what one starts, to keep learning, and to lighten the load for others is not merely a career strategy, but a worthy way to spend one's days. The question she leaves the reader with is finally a question about how to live, where you can be of greatest value, and what life is summoning you to do. Closing. Taken as a whole, Impact Players makes a deceptively large claim that the difference between extraordinary and ordinary contribution is not talent, credentials, or circumstance, but a way of seeing and a set of practices anyone can adopt. The Impact Player meets the messy, uncertain, demanding conditions of modern work with an opportunity lens rather than a threat lens, and from that single orientation flow the 5 habits: doing the job that's needed, stepping up and stepping back, finishing stronger, asking and adjusting, and making work light. What the reader carries forward is not a trick but a posture, attention turned outward toward genuine needs, agency exercised with persistence, humility open to correction, and a generosity that makes shared work lighter. It is, at bottom, a portrait of contribution as service, and of the person who serves well as the one who proves most valuable, precisely because value was never the point. The book's deeper resonance is its quiet confidence that people are not fixed quantities, but works in progress, capable of becoming more through deliberate effort. And that work, far from being mere transaction, can be a place where that becoming happens, and where we are summoned to give what is ours to give. Wiseman writes for managers and contributors alike, and her framework rewards both. This summary can only sketch the architecture. The book itself is full of the stories, survey data, practical plays, and appendices, including a detailed ranking of what builds and kills credibility, that make the argument land. It is well worth reading in full. Pick up Liz Wiseman's Impact Players, sit with its examples, and let it change how you see the next messy problem that lands on your desk.